In the earliest days, the Italian peninsula was a patchwork of tribes and scattered settlements, a land of forests, rivers, and hills. There were no empires, no grand roads, no aqueducts. There were only people struggling to survive, bound by the rhythms of the earth, the seasons, and the whims of the gods. Among these early tribes, the Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans carved out lives of subsistence and cautious alliances. They fought over land, over water, over cattle, over the very air that their children breathed. Survival demanded cunning, strength, and loyalty, but none of them could yet foresee that from this soil would emerge a city destined to command the world. Rome's story begins, as legend insists, with violence, with myth, and with blood. Romulus and Remus, twin sons of Mars and a Vestal virgin, were abandoned at birth. Left to die along the Tiber River, they were spared by fate, suckled by a she-wolf, raised in secrecy, and hardened by hardship. Their story, embroidered with divine intervention, speaks of an early Rome already entwined with both ambition and brutality. From their very first acts, the city's character was written in extremes. The fratricidal act of Romulus killing Remus to secure his vision of a city would become a recurring motif in Rome's history, a reminder that greatness would always demand sacrifice, often cruel and personal. The earliest Romans were not conquerors by design. They were survivors, observers, and adapters. They absorbed from their neighbors what they could. The Etruscans taught them the use of the arch and the art of fortified cities. The Greeks offered philosophy and religion, while the Sabines taught them the ways of negotiation and alliance. Rome learned that power was not only won by arms, but also by strategy, diplomacy, and law. And perhaps most importantly, they learned that unity was strength, a lesson that would define them for centuries. Rome's rise from village to city was neither swift nor easy. The earliest settlement was humble, built on 7 hills that offered both protection and challenge. Water was scarce, roads were primitive, and disease was ever present. Life was harsh, and death could come as easily from the bite of a snake as from the sword of a rival. But adversity forged resilience. The Romans developed the habit of endurance, of calculation, of patience. They were not the first to wield a sword, but they became the first to wield it with discipline, organization, and the foresight to build an empire that could last centuries. The transition from monarchy to republic was one of the first testaments to Roman ingenuity and pragmatism. Kings had ruled early Rome, but tyranny was a constant threat. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled after acts of cruelty and arrogance, and with his departure, the Roman Republic was born. It was an experiment unprecedented in the ancient world, a government where citizens could elect magistrates, senators could debate policy, and laws were codified and public. Yet even in this experiment, the seeds of tension were sown. The patricians, the aristocratic elite, held most of the power, while plebeians, the common citizens, had to fight for a voice. Rome's success would always rely on a careful balance between the will of the people and the ambition of the few. From these early years, Rome began to expand. It was not conquest for conquest's sake, but an incremental strategy. Alliances first, absorption second, and only if resistance was absolute did the legions march. The Roman army, organized and disciplined, became the backbone of this expansion. Legions were trained not only in combat, but in engineering, fortification, and logistics. Roads were built not for trade alone, but for rapid troop movement. Camps became temporary cities, and camps could become permanent settlements. Rome's strength lay not in the sheer force of numbers, but in the integration of society, military, and infrastructure. As the Republic grew, so too did internal conflicts. Neighboring tribes resisted, and the city-state had to learn to balance force with diplomacy. Wars were waged with calculated ruthlessness. Every victory brought new territory, but also new responsibilities: governance, taxation, and defense. The Romans became skilled administrators, and they codified their laws, creating a system that provided stability and predictability, even as the Republic stretched across central Italy. The struggle between patricians and plebeians was another defining factor of Rome's rise. While the patricians controlled the Senate and the magistracies, the plebeians demanded representation. This struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, lasted for centuries, but its resolution produced the tribunes of the plebs, officials who could protect the common people and veto decisions harmful to them. Rome's willingness to adapt politically, to evolve institutions in response to social pressures, was as important to its rise as any victory on the battlefield. By the 4th century BCE, Rome was engaged in nearly constant warfare, not just with neighboring tribes, but with the Etruscans, Samnites, and Greeks of southern Italy. The Romans were relentless. They learned from defeat, integrated conquered peoples into the military, and rewarded loyalty with citizenship and land. This combination of inclusivity and discipline ensured that Rome's army was not merely an instrument of war, but a unifying force that tied the Republic's territories together. Rome expanded not merely because it could conquer, but because it had a system to hold what it conquered. The conquest of the Italian peninsula was only the beginning. Rome's encounter with Carthage would define the Republic's character and reputation. The Punic Wars were not simply territorial disputes. They were existential conflicts that tested the very soul of Rome. Hannibal, brilliant tactician and invader, struck fear into the heart of the Republic when he crossed the Alps with elephants. Yet Rome endured. It rebuilt armies, adapted strategies, and refused to yield. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE was a moment of triumph and horror. A city obliterated, its population enslaved, its land salted. Rome had become merciless, and its enemies understood that resistance was perilous. Yet even as Rome expanded militarily, its culture evolved. The Republic was not merely a state, it was an idea, a system built on civic duty, public service, and the ideal of gravitas, seriousness, discipline, and moral integrity. Civic identity became as important as military might. Citizens were expected to participate, to defend the state, to uphold the law. Rome's institutions encouraged accountability, yet they also bred rivalry, ambition, and envy. It was a delicate equilibrium, one that allowed Rome to dominate the Mediterranean world, while sowing the seeds of internal conflict. The late Republic saw the rise of individuals whose ambition outstripped tradition. Men like Marius and Sulla transformed the army into instruments of personal power. Loyalty shifted from the state to the general. Political violence became a tool of governance. The institutions that had allowed Rome to rise were now under siege from within. The Senate struggled to maintain authority as charismatic leaders wielded armies to enforce their will. Civil wars erupted. Rome's growth had created vulnerabilities that no single law could contain. It was in this volatile environment that Julius Caesar emerged. Brilliant, calculating, and fearless, Caesar understood both the art of war and the intricacies of politics. He conquered Gaul, expanded Rome's territories beyond imagination, and returned to the city at the head of legions whose loyalty was to him personally. By crossing the Rubicon, he declared civil war. Rome itself became a battlefield, and in the ensuing conflict, the Republic began to fracture irreparably. Caesar's victory was both triumph and harbinger. The old system could no longer contain men of extraordinary ambition. Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE was a pivotal moment. The Republic's defenders had believed they could restore balance through murder, that removing a single man would save the system. But the die was cast. The Republic's institutions, already weakened, could not recover. Civil war continued. Out of the chaos rose Augustus, known first as Octavian, the heir of Caesar's vision. He was patient, calculating, and politically masterful. He restored the facade of the Republic, but in reality, he wielded power unmatched in Rome's history. The transition from Republic to Empire was complete. Under Augustus, Rome entered its golden age. The Pax Romana, Roman peace, stabilized the Mediterranean world. Infrastructure flourished: roads, aqueducts, temples, forums, and theaters. Trade networks connected the empire from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia. The legal system became a unifying force, a framework that integrated diverse peoples under a single rule of law. Rome was no longer merely a city. It was a civilization, a culture, a governing philosophy that endured beyond its borders. Augustus understood that an empire could not survive on military might alone. He cultivated culture, religion, and civic pride. Public works reminded citizens of Rome's grandeur. Festivals and games entertained, distracted, and unified the population. Rome's rise was not only through conquest, but through assimilation, incorporating local elites, customs, and traditions into the Roman fold. It was both a network of cities and a network of minds, bound together by loyalty, fear, and shared identity. By the end of his reign, Rome had transformed from a city-state into a world power. Its enemies had been subdued or absorbed. Its institutions, though adapted, were strong. Its military, disciplined and loyal, enforced order across vast distances. The rise of Rome had been a combination of vision, ambition, law, and adaptability. The myths of Romulus and Remus had evolved into the reality of Augustus, and the Republic's legacy had been transformed into the enduring authority of the empire. The rise of Rome was neither inevitable nor simple. It was forged through centuries of struggle, compromise, and conflict. It was built by farmers, soldiers, politicians, and emperors alike. Each conquest, each law, each military innovation, each adaptation to crisis, all contributed to the creation of a power unlike any before it. Rome was more than an empire. It was an idea that demanded obedience, inspired loyalty, and instilled fear. And in its rise, one could already glimpse the fragility that would eventually threaten its existence. The very success of Rome planted the seeds of internal conflict, political corruption, and societal inequality. The foundations were set. The Republic had given way to empire. The Mediterranean world was under Rome's control. Trade, culture, and law flourished. Rome had risen from mud huts and riverbanks to dominate the known world. But every ascent carries the weight of gravity, and for Rome, the question was not whether it would rise, but how long it could endure before its own ambition and the forces it had unleashed would challenge its supremacy. As Rome's territories expanded, so too did the complexity of its society. The Republic had grown from a city-state into a network of cities, roads, and provinces, each with its own customs, challenges, and potential for unrest. The integration of conquered peoples required both diplomacy and enforcement. Some communities embraced Roman citizenship, others remained fiercely independent, yet Rome found ways to bind them through law, taxation, and the promise of protection. Loyalty was bought not only with coins, but with opportunity. Ambitious men in distant lands could rise to prominence if they served the Republic faithfully. The army remained the engine of Rome's growth. It was a machine built not only for conquest, but for cohesion. Soldiers were trained to march, fight, and build. Camps were transformed into roads, bridges, and fortresses. Discipline was enforced through rigorous drills and an unyielding hierarchy. Rome's victories were not accidents of luck. They were the result of meticulous organization, logistical precision, and the relentless training of men who saw themselves as part of a greater purpose. Yet expansion brought with it unprecedented challenges. The Italian peninsula was a mosaic of cultures, each with its own loyalties and resentments. The Samnites in the south resisted fiercely, and the wars that followed, the Samnite Wars, were brutal tests of Roman strategy, patience, and endurance. Victory was never assured. Rome adapted through innovation, both in tactics and alliances, demonstrating an ability to learn and endure that its enemies could not match. With each campaign, the Republic extended its influence, binding neighboring regions into a network of roads, treaties, and Roman oversight. The social structure of Rome continued to evolve under these pressures. The patricians, already dominant, found their authority challenged by the plebeians, who demanded a voice in governance. The conflict of the orders shaped the Republic profoundly. Over generations, the plebeians gained access to magistracies and legal protections that had once been exclusive to the elite. Tribunes of the plebs could veto unjust laws, safeguard citizens, and act as a counterbalance to senatorial authority. These political innovations were more than compromise. They were the scaffolding of a resilient state, one capable of withstanding internal tensions while projecting power outward. Rome's growing wealth, derived from conquest, trade, and taxation, became both a blessing and a curse. With abundance came corruption. Ambitious generals leveraged the loyalty of their legions for political gain. Senators engaged in bribery and intrigue. The mechanisms that had allowed Rome to rise were now susceptible to manipulation. Civil strife, once a rarity, began to surface with alarming frequency. Ambition, unchecked by tradition or law, threatened to undo the very system that had enabled the Republic's expansion. The Punic Wars with Carthage marked a defining chapter in Rome's rise. Carthage, a city of merchants and sailors, rivaled Rome's ambitions in the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War, fought over Sicily, tested the Republic's naval capabilities. Rome, traditionally a land power, adapted, building fleets and learning the art of naval warfare through innovation and tenacity. Victory came at immense cost, yet it marked Rome's first step toward maritime dominance. The Second Punic War introduced Hannibal, a general of extraordinary skill. His crossing of the Alps with war elephants remains one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history. Rome faced annihilation in battle after battle, yet the Republic endured through resilience, strategic foresight, and the ability to mobilize resources over vast distances. Scipio Africanus ultimately defeated Hannibal at Zama, cementing Rome's supremacy and demonstrating that the Republic's strength lay not only in tactical brilliance, but in endurance, unity, and adaptability. Rome's victory over Carthage had profound consequences. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE was total, a testament to the Republic's determination and ruthlessness. The city was razed, its population enslaved, and its lands absorbed into Rome. This moment signaled Rome's transition from a regional power to a hegemonic force in the Mediterranean. Wealth, territory, and prestige flowed into the Republic, but so too did new challenges, managing distant provinces, maintaining order, and balancing the ambitions of generals and politicians who now wielded armies loyal to themselves rather than the state. Internal political evolution continued alongside military expansion. The late Republic witnessed increasing reliance on charismatic leaders whose personal ambitions often clashed with institutional authority. Figures such as Marius and Sulla redefined the relationship between army and state, creating professional armies whose allegiance was to generals rather than the Senate. Civil war, once unthinkable, became a recurring reality. The delicate balance of the Republic between patrician and plebeian, Senate and people, general and citizen, was under threat, yet the system demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting through reforms, negotiations, and, at times, brutal enforcement. Amidst this turbulence, Rome's culture flourished. The arts, literature, and architecture reflected both the Republic's ideals and the realities of its ambitions. Temples, forums, and public works embodied civic pride and religious devotion. Oratory and philosophy shaped political discourse. Roman identity became intertwined with participation in public life, military service, and adherence to law. Citizenship was a prized privilege, citizenship with rights and responsibilities. Rome's culture, like its military and political structures, was adaptive, absorbing influences from conquered peoples while maintaining core values that fostered unity and resilience. The end of the Republic, however, loomed on the horizon. Julius Caesar emerged as a figure whose talents and ambitions exceeded the constraints of tradition. Military genius, political acumen, and a charismatic presence allowed him to navigate the complex web of Roman politics. His conquest of Gaul expanded the Republic's borders dramatically and increased his personal prestige and influence. Yet it was his crossing of the Rubicon, defying the Senate's authority, that irrevocably changed the course of Roman history. Civil war was inevitable. The Republic, already strained by social divisions and political rivalries, would never be the same. Caesar's ascent highlighted both the strengths and vulnerabilities of Rome. The Republic had created institutions capable of uniting diverse peoples and sustaining a powerful state. Yet it had also produced conditions in which extraordinary individuals could concentrate power in ways that threatened those same institutions. Caesar's reforms, conquests, and eventual dictatorship revealed the paradox of Rome's rise. Its ability to grow and dominate was inseparable from the tensions that would eventually destabilize it. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE was both an attempt to restore the Republic and a demonstration of its fragility. The conspirators believed that eliminating one man could preserve centuries of political tradition. Instead, their act precipitated further civil wars, drawing Rome into a cycle of conflict that would only end with the emergence of a single, uncontested ruler. The Republic's ideals had been instrumental in Rome's rise, but by the late 1st century BCE, they were unable to contain the ambitions unleashed by centuries of expansion, wealth, and military innovation. From the chaos of Caesar's death, Augustus, Octavian, emerged. Patient, calculating, and politically astute, he understood the necessity of stabilizing Rome through both appearance and reality. He maintained the structures of the Republic while consolidating ultimate authority in his own hands. The Republic had given Rome the foundation for expansion. Augustus transformed that foundation into the Roman Empire. Under his rule, Rome entered an era of unprecedented stability, growth, and cultural flourishing. The Pax Romana, enforced by disciplined legions and supported by a sophisticated bureaucracy, allowed Rome to consolidate its territories, integrate diverse populations, and promote trade, law, and culture across the Mediterranean. Roads connected cities, aqueducts carried water to urban centers, and monumental architecture showcased Rome's power and vision. The empire became more than a collection of provinces. It became a unified civilization, bound by law, language, and shared identity. Augustus also recognized that legitimacy required both coercion and consent. He maintained a senate, allowed for local traditions in conquered territories, and used religious and cultural symbols to unify diverse peoples under the banner of Rome. The rise of the empire was not merely a triumph of arms, it was the result of shrewd governance, adaptation, and the creation of a system that could endure for centuries. By the end of Augustus's reign, Rome had transitioned fully from a republic struggling with internal conflict to an empire capable of projecting power and maintaining stability over vast distances. The foundations of Roman governance, law, military organization, and culture had matured into a system capable of enduring challenges from both within and beyond its borders. The rise of Rome was now complete. From humble beginnings along the Tiber to dominion over the Mediterranean, the Republic had become an empire, and the dream of Rome, an idea as much as a city, had reached its full expression. Rome's rise was not a single event, nor was it guaranteed by force of arms alone. It was a process that unfolded over centuries, shaped by law, culture, warfare, diplomacy, and the relentless ambition of men and women who understood that the city's survival depended on adaptation. Rome's genius lay in its capacity to absorb, integrate, and innovate. Conquered peoples were not merely dominated, they were drawn into the Roman system, taught the laws, invited to participate in governance, and offered paths to citizenship. This combination of coercion and consent created a loyalty that was pragmatic yet enduring. Under Augustus, this integration reached its apex. The provinces were no longer distant, chaotic territories, but functioning components of a larger whole. Governors administered justice, collected taxes, and ensured security, while local customs were largely respected. Trade networks flourished, connecting Spain to Egypt, Britain to Syria. Roman currency became the medium of commerce across the Mediterranean. Roads, bridges, and ports facilitated not only military movements, but the flow of ideas, goods, and people. Rome had created a civilization that was both centralized and flexible, capable of projecting power while accommodating diversity. Cultural and social cohesion were equally important to the empire's rise. Religion, art, and public spectacle were tools of unification. Temples and shrines, theaters and amphitheaters, forums and basilicas, all were symbols of a shared Roman identity. Festivals, gladiatorial games, and public ceremonies reinforced social bonds, instilled civic pride, and distracted the populace from political tensions. Augustus understood that an empire was held together not only by armies but by belief. the belief that Rome was eternal, sacred, and rightful. Literacy and law became unifying forces. Roman law, codified and enforced, provided a framework within which citizens and subjects could operate. Rights, responsibilities, and legal precedent bound the empire together, allowing distant provinces to function without constant oversight. Education, rhetoric, and philosophy flourished in urban centers. Rome's elites were trained not only in politics, but in the art of persuasion, military strategy, and governance. This intellectual culture, rooted in practicality and adaptability, reinforced Rome's structural resilience. Yet the Republic's transformation into empire came with inherent contradictions. The concentration of power in the hands of a single ruler contradicted centuries of republican ideals. The Senate retained its form, but not its authority. Emperors ruled with a combination of fear, charisma, and bureaucratic control. The tension between tradition and innovation, between citizen participation and autocratic power, defined Rome's political landscape. It was a delicate equilibrium that required skillful navigation and constant vigilance. Augustus maintained it with patience and foresight, but the system he built relied on his genius as much as on the institutions themselves. Military organization remained central to Rome's stability and expansion. Legions were professionalized, disciplined, and strategically deployed. Rome's borders were fortified, not merely with walls but with networks of roads and forts, allowing rapid response to threats. The army became both a tool of conquest and a mechanism of control. It enforced order within the provinces, deterred rebellion, and symbolized Rome's omnipresent authority. Loyalty to Rome was cultivated through pay, land grants, and the promise of honor, but also through strict discipline and the clear understanding that service to the empire was service to a larger cause. Economic prosperity underpinned Rome's rise. Agriculture, trade, and taxation created wealth that funded armies, public works, and civic programs. Provinces supplied grain, metals, and luxury goods. Cities flourished as centers of commerce, culture, and administration. The Mediterranean, once a region of fragmented city-states, became a Roman lake, linked by commerce, law, and the presence of legions. Wealth enabled the state to reward loyalty, invest in infrastructure, and sustain an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. The rise of Rome also depended on effective communication and bureaucracy. Letters, messengers, and administrative records ensured that decrees from Rome reached even distant provinces. Local officials were accountable, provincial governors monitored, and Rome's vast territories were coordinated through a combination of central oversight and local autonomy. This system allowed Rome to govern more efficiently than almost any other ancient civilization. Yet with efficiency came vulnerability. Corruption, incompetence, and local ambition could undermine even the most well-constructed framework. Rome's ability to manage these risks was central to its endurance. Despite its accomplishments, Rome's rise was marked by contradictions and tensions that would shape its future. The Republic's ideals of shared governance and citizen participation had been sacrificed to stability and central authority. Expansion had brought wealth and power, but also social inequality, political ambition, and dependence on military loyalty. Cultural cohesion was reinforced through law, religion, and spectacle. Yet the diversity of the empire created pressures that would continue for centuries. These contradictions were not yet fatal. In fact, they had enabled Rome to grow. but they planted seeds that would later test the empire's resilience. The personal ambitions of Rome's leaders, from generals to emperors, played a defining role in its rise. Julius Caesar demonstrated how individual genius could exploit the republic's structures, achieving conquests and reforms that extended Rome's influence dramatically. Augustus demonstrated how political acumen, patience, and careful manipulation of institutions could consolidate power, stabilize society, and create the appearance of continuity while transforming reality. Leadership, more than anything, had been a decisive factor in Rome's transformation from a city-state to a Mediterranean superpower. The cultural achievements of this era cannot be overstated. Literature, philosophy, and art flourished. Virgil's Aeneid traced the mythic origins of Rome, connecting history with ideology. Architecture reflected both utility and grandeur. Aqueducts, amphitheaters, forums, and temples signaled power, sophistication, and permanence. Public works not only served practical needs, but symbolized the empire's capacity to organize, control, and inspire. Roman identity was both civic and cultural, binding citizens and subjects across vast distances. By the end of the 1st century BCE, the Mediterranean world had been transformed. Rome's territory stretched from the Atlantic to the Near East. Its institutions, culture, and military organization had matured into a system capable of sustaining unprecedented power. The foundations of law, governance, infrastructure, and culture provided the scaffolding for an empire that would endure for centuries. The rise of Rome was complete, but it was not static. It had achieved dominance, yet every strength carried the potential for vulnerability. The Republic had evolved into empire, and the empire would soon face tests that no man, however brilliant, could entirely control. The story of Rome's rise is not a tale of inevitability. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and ambition. It is a story of how a city, born of myth and hardship, could master its environment, organize its people, and extend its influence across the known world. The genius of Rome lay in its systems, its leaders, and its capacity to integrate diverse peoples into a functioning civilization. Its story, though, is not solely about triumph. It is also a prelude, a foundation for the challenges, decadence, and crises that would define the empire at its height and ultimately test the limits of its endurance. As Rome rose, it created both a model and a mirror for the world, a civilization capable of extraordinary achievement, yet dependent on the delicate balance between authority, ambition, and loyalty. The roads, the laws, the legions, and the culture would carry Rome across centuries, shaping the Mediterranean and leaving a legacy that endures in language, law, and thought. The rise of Rome was more than conquest. It was engineering society itself, a complex machine of governance, culture, military organization, and law, capable of integrating the conquered into the conqueror's vision. Rome's success lay in foresight, pragmatism, and the relentless pursuit of order across a chaotic world. It had grown from mud huts and riverbanks to dominate continents, and in its rise, it revealed the capacities and contradictions that would forever define the Roman experience. Rome's ability to absorb and integrate was perhaps its most enduring strength. Provinces were not simply occupied, they were incorporated. Local elites were granted citizenship, taxes and trade were regulated to create mutual dependence, and local cultures were respected as long as loyalty to Rome remained intact. In this way, the empire created a network of interdependence, a web in which loyalty, opportunity, and coercion intertwined to sustain cohesion across vast distances. Yet the contradictions were inherent and persistent. The Republic's ideals, citizen participation, checks on power, shared governance, had been subordinated to centralized authority. Military might had become inseparable from political power, and wealth accumulation created stark inequalities. The urban elite thrived while rural populations often suffered, and the scale of administration sometimes outstripped capacity. Rome's system was flexible and resilient, but it relied on continuous adaptation, capable leadership, and a shared sense of purpose among its subjects. Religion, ritual, and culture were equally critical. Augustus and his successors understood that empire required not only governance, but legitimacy. Temples, festivals, and public ceremonies reinforced a shared Roman identity. Deities and religious observances were used to unify diverse populations, while literature, public works, and monumental architecture created a narrative of grandeur and inevitability. Rome's citizens and subjects came to see themselves as participants in something larger than individual ambition, a civilization that spanned continents and generations. Economic integration cemented this cohesion. Trade networks connected distant provinces, distributing goods, currency, and cultural influence. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, aqueducts, and ports linked the empire, facilitating commerce, communication, and rapid military response. Wealth flowed from conquered territories into Rome, funding public works, military salaries, and civic projects that reinforced loyalty and dependence. The empire became a living, functioning organism with a circulation of resources, people, and ideas that mirrored its military precision. Education, rhetoric, and philosophy flourished alongside these material achievements. Roman elites were trained in law, governance, military strategy, and oratory. Knowledge and cultural capital became tools of governance and cohesion. Literature and history shaped collective memory, providing both cautionary tales and models of behavior. Through education, Rome extended its influence beyond mere political or military power, embedding civic and cultural norms across the empire. Yet even as Rome achieved cohesion and dominance, the seeds of tension remained. Military loyalty to generals, economic disparity, and the inherent contradictions between autocracy and tradition created pressures that would challenge the empire in the centuries to come. Rome's rise was magnificent, but it had produced vulnerabilities. Tensions between center and periphery, between elite and commoner, between tradition and innovation, that would shape the narrative of the empire long after Augustus's death. The rise of Rome, therefore, was as much a triumph of human organization and ingenuity as it was of military conquest. It was a civilization engineered through law, governance, military discipline, cultural integration, and social negotiation. Its success lay not simply in defeating enemies, but in constructing systems capable of sustaining authority, unity, and identity across an entire known world. Rome was more than an empire, it was an idea, a blueprint for civilization that influenced generations long after the legions fell silent. And thus, by the close of this era, the stage was set for the empire's zenith, a period in which Rome would achieve unprecedented power, wealth, and cultural achievement, yet also encounter pressures and contradictions that would echo through history. The rise of Rome, with all its brilliance and its shadows, had prepared the world for the grandeur and the trials that lay ahead. Its story was a testament to resilience, ambition, and the human capacity to create order from chaos, a story that would resonate for millennia. Rome had achieved what few civilizations could even imagine. From the mud huts of the Tiber banks to the sprawling cities of the Mediterranean, it had created an empire that was both vast and intricate, strong yet adaptable. Its legions, laws, infrastructure, and culture bound together lands that stretched from the Atlantic coasts to the deserts of the Near East. And yet, for all its accomplishments, Rome's rise was not free of tension, contradiction, or fragility. Every triumph carried the weight of responsibility. Every conquest sowed the seeds of future challenge. The Roman Empire rested upon the genius of its systems. Governance, military organization, law, and social integration were interwoven into a structure capable of withstanding shocks and absorbing diversity. Yet the system depended on constant vigilance. Military loyalty had to be carefully cultivated, provincial administration had to be monitored, and economic resources had to be balanced to sustain both Rome and its provinces. Failure in any of these areas could, and often did, ripple across the empire, threatening the very foundations upon which its power rested. Culturally, Rome had achieved an unprecedented synthesis. Local traditions were absorbed, adapted, and reframed within the larger Roman identity. Religion was both a unifying and legitimizing force, blending Roman deities with regional cults to create a shared spiritual framework. Art, architecture, and literature celebrated the empire while reinforcing civic values. Public spectacles, forums, and monuments not only demonstrated Rome's wealth and power, but also reinforced social cohesion and loyalty. Civic identity became inseparable from imperial identity. The economy, too, was a marvel of organization and integration. Roads, ports, and cities facilitated trade across continents. Grain from Egypt fed Rome, silver from Spain funded legions, and spices from the East enriched markets and elite tables. Wealth enabled the empire to sustain armies, fund public works, and maintain order. Yet economic prosperity also created inequality. Urban elites accumulated luxury and power, while rural populations often struggled under taxation and conscription. Rome's system relied on a delicate balance between reward, coercion, and integration. Military might remain central. The legions were the backbone of Rome, enforcing law, deterring rebellion, and projecting power. Soldiers were not only warriors, but builders, engineers, and administrators. Through their labor, Rome's reach extended not merely through conquest, but through the infrastructure that enabled governance, trade, and cultural cohesion. The military was both instrument and symbol, a constant reminder of Rome's capacity to organize and dominate. Yet with power came inherent contradictions. The Republic's ideals of shared governance and citizen participation had been subsumed under imperial authority. Emperors wielded unprecedented power, balancing coercion with legitimacy, fear with respect. The Senate existed in form, but not in function. Military loyalty, economic inequality, and the pressures of managing a vast empire created tensions that required constant navigation. Rome's rise was a story of extraordinary achievement built upon fragile equilibrium. Leadership had been decisive throughout this rise. Figures like Julius Caesar and Augustus shaped Rome's destiny, demonstrating how ambition, vision, and strategic acumen could exploit opportunity, consolidate authority, and transform institutions. Yet even as individuals shaped history, Rome's systems endured, demonstrating a remarkable resilience born of centuries of adaptation. The interplay between human agency and institutional structure was central to the empire's success. The lessons of Rome's rise extended beyond the battlefield and the halls of power. Its capacity to integrate, adapt, and innovate provided a blueprint for governance, military organization, and cultural cohesion. Rome showed that dominance was not solely achieved through conquest, but through the creation of systems that could endure, unify, and inspire. Its roads, laws, legions, and civic ideals became instruments of stability and longevity. And yet, for all its order, Rome remained subject to the forces of ambition, inequality, and human frailty. The rise of Rome also revealed the delicate balance between ambition and sustainability. Expansion brought wealth and power, but also social inequality and political vulnerability. Military success ensured dominance, but military loyalty could undermine the state. Cultural cohesion created identity, yet diversity could generate tension. Rome's story demonstrated that greatness is inseparable from complexity, that achievement carries responsibility, and that the forces enabling success can also challenge it. In its final synthesis, Rome's rise was more than historical narrative. It was an example of civilization itself, a machine of law, culture, military organization, and governance designed to integrate human ambition and societal order. Its achievements reshaped the Mediterranean world, leaving an indelible mark on governance, law, infrastructure, military organization, and cultural identity. From the Tiber's banks to the farthest provinces, Rome created an enduring legacy that would influence generations long after the legions had ceased to march. And so, the stage was set for the empire's zenith. Rome had mastered the art of integration, adaptation, and authority. Its legions stood ready, its laws codified, its roads and aqueducts spanning continents, and its culture thriving. But Rome's ascent also foreshadowed the trials ahead, the tensions, contradictions, and pressures that accompany any great power. Its story of rise was thus both triumphant and cautionary, a narrative of human ingenuity, ambition, and the fragile architecture of civilization. Rome had risen from mud, rivers, and the dreams of its founders to dominate the known world. It had achieved unity through law, loyalty, culture, and military organization. Its legacy was both concrete and conceptual. Roads, aqueducts, and cities, literature, philosophy, and identity. The story of Rome's rise, while now complete, was only the prelude to the challenges that the empire would face, the decadence and conflicts that would test its resilience, and the enduring lessons it would leave for history. In the end, Rome's ascent reminds us that civilization is an act of both creation and preservation. Power requires foresight, authority demands legitimacy, and greatness depends on integration, adaptation, and resilience. Rome's rise was neither simple nor inevitable. It was the result of centuries of struggle, vision, ambition, and ingenuity. From the legends of Romulus and Remus to the administrative genius of Augustus, Rome had forged an empire that would echo across centuries, a testament to human capacity to shape, organize, and inspire the world. The rise of Rome, with all its brilliance, contradictions, and shadows, had prepared the world for the grandeur and the trials that lay ahead. Its story endures as a mirror of ambition, a lesson in governance, and a blueprint for civilizations yet to come. Rome was not merely a city or an empire. It was an idea, one that would shape the course of history for millennia. Like and subscribe. If you liked the video, I will see you in the next one.